Staff Sergeant Maya Rodriguez had always been the kind of soldier who flew under the radar. Not because she lacked skill, quite the opposite actually, but because she preferred the shadows to the spotlight. At Forward Operating Base Sentinel, nestled in the unforgiving mountains of Afghanistan, Maya had earned a reputation as the reliable one, the steady hand, the soldier you could count on when things went sideways. She wasn't the fastest runner, she wasn't the loudest voice in the barracks, and she certainly wasn't the first to volunteer for glory-seeking missions. But when equipment broke down, when protocols failed, when chaos reigned supreme, Maya Rodriguez was the calm in the storm. The morning of October 15th started like any other day in the combat zone. The sun painted the rocky peaks in shades of amber and gold, a deceptively beautiful backdrop for what was essentially a militarized outpost in one of the world's most hostile environments. Maya was conducting her routine equipment checks in the armory, her calloused fingers moving with practiced precision over each weapon system. The M4 carbines were clean and functional, the M249 squad automatic weapons properly maintained, and the sniper rifles, her personal area of expertise, were in pristine condition. She had a relationship with these weapons that bordered on the spiritual. She understood their quirks, their preferences, their moods like old friends. It was during her inspection of the backup rifles that she encountered the problem. Rifle number 7743, a standard M4 that had seen better days, had developed what appeared to be a feeding mechanism issue. The bolt wouldn't fully seat, the magazine wouldn't properly engage, and every attempt to cycle the action resulted in a frustrating metallic grinding sound that made Maya's teeth ache. She'd seen this problem before. Usually it was a simple matter of replacing a worn spring or cleaning out accumulated debris from the desert environment. But this particular rifle seemed determined to resist her efforts. Maya had been working on the stubborn weapon for nearly 2 hours when Lieutenant Colonel Harrison approached her workstation. Harrison was a by-the-book officer who had earned his stripes in multiple deployments, a man who respected competence and despised excuses. His weathered face bore the kind of lines that came from years of making life-and-death decisions, and his steel-gray eyes missed nothing. Maya respected him immensely, which made his next words all the more surprising. "Rodriguez," he said, his voice carrying that particular tone that meant business, "we've got a situation. Command wants to test our rapid response capabilities, and they're sending an evaluation team next week. Part of their assessment includes a marksmanship demonstration, long-range precision shooting under combat conditions. I need someone who can perform when it counts. Someone who won't fold under pressure." Maya looked up from the disassembled rifle parts scattered across her workbench, her dark eyes questioning. "Sir, with respect, we have several designated marksmen. Who would be more appropriate for a demonstration? Sergeant Williams has the highest scores in the battalion, and Corporal Chen just completed advanced sniper training." Harrison shook his head, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Williams is solid, but he gets nervous around brass. Chen is technically proficient, but she lacks field experience. I've been watching you, Rodriguez. I've seen how you handle yourself when things go to hell. Remember the convoy ambush last month? While everyone else was returning suppressive fire, you were the one who spotted the insurgent position and made the shot that broke their attack. 500 meters, moving target, under fire, with a rifle you'd never used before." The memory was still fresh in Maya's mind. The convoy had been returning from a routine supply run when they'd been hit by a coordinated attack from elevated positions. The enemy had chosen their ambush site well, a narrow valley with limited cover and overlapping fields of fire. Maya had been riding in the second vehicle when the first RPG struck the lead truck, turning what should have been a boring drive into a fight for survival. In the chaos that followed, with bullets cracking overhead and her fellow soldiers scrambling. For cover, Maya had noticed something that others had missed. The muzzle flashes from the enemy positions weren't random. They were coordinated, directed by someone with a clear view of the entire engagement area. She had crawled through the rocky terrain, ignoring the rounds that spanged off the stones around her, until she reached a position where she could see. the enemy spotter. He was positioned on a ridge nearly half a kilometer away, using a pair of binoculars to direct the other fighter's fire. Maya had borrowed a rifle from a wounded soldier, an M14 that she'd never fired before, with an unfamiliar scope and an unknown zero, and made one of the most important shots of her military career. The enemy spotter had dropped. The coordinated fire had dissolved into confusion, and the convoy had fought its way clear. "Sir," Maya said carefully, "that was different. That was combat, not a demonstration. When lives are on the line, the pressure is real, but the stakes are clear. A performance evaluation is political." "Exactly why I need you," Harrison replied. "You don't think about the politics. You don't worry about the audience. You just focus on the mission. The evaluation team will be here Monday morning, and they want to see a live-fire exercise that demonstrates our unit's combat readiness. Long-range precision shooting, multiple targets, time pressure, and simulated stress conditions. Can you do it?" Maya looked down at the jammed rifle in her hands, its components spread across the workbench like the pieces of a mechanical puzzle. The irony wasn't lost on her. Here she was, being asked to demonstrate marksmanship excellence while struggling with a weapon that wouldn't even function properly. But, as she considered the colonel's request, she felt something stirring in her chest, a familiar sensation that she had learned to trust over years of military service. It wasn't excitement exactly, nor was it fear. It was the feeling of stepping up to a challenge that mattered, of being trusted with something important. "Yes, sir," she said finally, her voice steady and confident. "I can do it." Harrison nodded, the approval in his expression unmistakable. "Good. I'll have Sergeant Major Kelly work out the details with you. The course of fire will include targets at ranges from 300 to 800 meters, various positions, and time constraints that simulate combat conditions. You'll have the weekend to prepare, and you can use any rifle from our inventory that you're comfortable with." As the colonel walked away, Maya turned her attention back to the stubborn rifle. She had a decision to make: abandon this particular weapon and select something more reliable for her preparation, or solve the puzzle that lay before her. The practical choice was obvious, but Maya had never been one to leave a problem unsolved, especially when that problem involved a piece of equipment that other soldiers might depend on in combat. She picked up the bolt carrier group and examined it under the bright fluorescent lights of the armory. The metal surfaces were worn but not damaged. The gas rings were within tolerance and the firing pin moved freely. The problem had to be elsewhere in the system. Maya's mind began to work through the possibilities systematically, the way she had been trained to troubleshoot complex mechanical systems. She thought about the symptoms: the failure to feed, the bolt that wouldn't seat properly, the grinding sound during cycling. Each clue painted part of a picture, and Maya was determined to see the whole thing. Hours passed as she worked, her focus so complete that she barely noticed the other soldiers coming and going around her. The armory grew quiet as the day shift ended and the evening crew took over. Maya's hands moved with increasing confidence as she identified and eliminated potential causes. A worn extractor spring was replaced. A burr on the bolt extension was carefully filed away. The chamber was cleaned and inspected until it gleamed like new. But still, the rifle refused to function properly. It was nearly midnight when Maya finally discovered the real problem. Hidden beneath layers of carbon buildup and desert grit, the bolt carrier key, the small but critical component that channels gas pressure to cycle the action, had worked slightly loose. It was still tight enough to pass a casual inspection, but loose enough to allow gas to escape, reducing the pressure needed to properly cycle the rifle. It was the kind of problem that might manifest intermittently in combat, causing a weapon to fail at the worst possible moment. As Maya, carefully, tightened the bolt carrier key and applied the proper thread-locking compound, she felt a familiar satisfaction. This wasn't about the upcoming evaluation or the pressure to perform. This was about ensuring that a weapon would function when someone's life depended on it. Every rifle that left her hands would be reliable, accurate, and ready for whatever. Challenges awaited it. She reassembled the weapon with practiced efficiency, her movements sure and economical. The bolt carrier slid smoothly into the upper receiver. The charging handle engaged with a satisfying click, and when she pulled the trigger on the empty chamber, the firing pin struck home with crisp authority. Maya loaded a dummy round into the chamber and cycled the action. The bolt moved smoothly, the extraction was positive, and the feeding was flawless. The weekend arrived with the kind of oppressive heat that made even the mountains feel like an oven. Maya had planned to spend Saturday and Sunday on the range, methodically zeroing rifles and practicing the various shooting positions that would be required for the evaluation. She had selected 3 different weapons from the Armory's inventory: a match-grade M14, a precision-tuned M4 with a high-end optic, and the standard sniper rifle that she knew like the back of her hand. Each weapon had its strengths and characteristics, and Maya wanted options when the moment came to perform. But Saturday morning brought an unexpected complication that would change everything about her preparation. Maya was walking toward the range carrying her rifle case and a bag of ammunition when she heard raised voices coming from behind the communications bunker. As she rounded the corner, she discovered a scene that made her blood run cold. 3 soldiers from another unit had cornered Private First Class Danny Kim, one of the youngest members of her platoon, and were in the process of what could only be described as systematic harassment. Danny Kim was barely 19 years old, a kid from Seattle who had enlisted straight out of high school to pay for college. He was small for a soldier, barely meeting the minimum height requirements, with thick-rimmed glasses and a quiet demeanor that made him an easy target for bullies. Maya had watched him struggle through basic training and advanced individual training, but she had also seen something in him that others missed: an incredible attention to detail and an analytical mind that made him one of the best communications specialists in the battalion. "Look, boys, the little professor wants to play soldier," one of the harassers was saying, his voice dripping with mock sympathy. Staff Sergeant Rex Turner was a career soldier from Maya's own unit, a man who had somehow managed to advance in rank despite a reputation for poor judgment and worse leadership. He was flanked by 2 corporals from a transportation company, both of whom seemed to be enjoying the show. Danny was pressed against the concrete wall of the bunker, his hands trembling as he tried to hold on to his equipment bag. His glasses were askew, and Maya could see that his uniform was torn at the shoulder. "Please," he was saying, his voice barely above a whisper. "I just need to get to my duty station. Sergeant Major Kelly is expecting me." Turner laughed, a harsh sound that made Maya's jaw clench. "Sergeant Major Kelly isn't here to protect you, kid, and neither is your precious Staff Sergeant Rodriguez. Word around the base is that she's too busy playing with her guns to worry about babysitting weaklings like you." The mention of her name hit Maya like a physical blow. She realized that this wasn't random harassment. This was targeted, deliberate, and somehow connected to her selection for the evaluation. Turner had always resented Maya's competence, her quiet authority, and the respect she commanded from both officers and enlisted personnel. He was the kind of soldier who confused volume with leadership, aggression with strength, and Maya's very existence was a rebuke to everything he represented. Maya could have walked away. She could have reported the incident through proper channels, filed a complaint with the chain of command, and let the system handle the problem. But as she watched Danny Kim's shoulders shake with suppressed fear, as she saw the cruel enjoyment on Turner's face, something inside her snapped. This wasn't about regulations or proper procedures. This was about protecting someone who couldn't protect himself. "Turner," Maya said, her voice cutting through the morning heat like a blade. "Step away from the kid." All 4 men turned toward her, surprise registering on their faces. Turner recovered first, his expression shifting to one of calculated insolence. "Well, well," he said, making no move to back away from Danny. "If it isn't our base shooting star. Heard you're going to put on a little show for the brass next week. Hope you don't choke when it matters." Maya set her rifle case down carefully and took 3 steps closer, her movement deliberate and controlled. She was smaller than Turner by several inches and at least 40 pounds, but there was something in her posture that made the two corporals take an unconscious step backward. I said, "Step away from him, Turner. This is your only warning." Turner's eyes narrowed, and Maya could see him calculating the situation. They were alone behind the bunker, out of sight of the main base activities. There were no witnesses except his two followers and the kid he was terrorizing. Whatever happened here would be his word against hers, and Turner had never been one to back down from what he perceived as a challenge to his authority. "Or what?" Turner said, taking a half-step toward Maya. "You going to shoot me with that fancy rifle of yours? Oh, wait, you probably can't even hit anything without your precious scope and perfect range conditions. I bet when the pressure's on, when people are actually watching, you'll fold like a house of cards." The words were designed to provoke, to goad Maya into making a mistake that Turner could exploit. But Maya had faced down enemy fighters who were trying to kill her. She wasn't about to be intimidated by a bully in her own unit. Instead of responding with anger, she did something that completely threw Turner off balance. She smiled. "You know." "What, Turner?" Maya said, her voice conversational and relaxed. "You're right about one thing. I am going to put on a show for the brass next week. And you know what else? You're going to be there to watch it." Turner's confidence wavered slightly. This wasn't the reaction he had expected. "What's that supposed to mean?" Maya's smile widened, but there was nothing warm or friendly about it. "It means I'm going to make you a deal. Right here, right now, in front of your friends and Private Kim as witnesses. You seem to think I can't perform under pressure, that I'll fold when it matters. So let's test that theory." She gestured toward the mountain ridge that formed the backdrop of their firing range, where steel targets were visible as tiny specks at distances ranging from 400 to 800 meters. "See that ridge? See those targets? I'll bet you that I can hit every single one of those targets in sequence from left to right in under 3 minutes. Not with my fancy sniper rifle, not with a precision weapon, but with whatever rifle you choose from the standard armory inventory." Turner looked toward the ridge, his eyes squinting against the morning sun. Even with binoculars, the most distant targets were barely visible. "You're crazy," he said, but Maya could hear the uncertainty creeping into his voice. "Maybe," Maya replied. "But here's the deal. If I make every shot, you leave Private Kim alone, permanently, and you spread the word to your buddies that harassment of junior enlisted soldiers stops now. But if I miss even one shot, I'll request a transfer to another unit and you'll never have to deal with me again." The two corporals were looking back and forth between Maya and Turner, clearly sensing that the situation had shifted in ways they didn't understand. Danny Kim was still pressed against the wall, but his eyes were wide with something that might have been hope. Turner considered the proposition, his mind working through the angles. From his perspective, it was a win-win situation. Either Maya would fail spectacularly, proving his point about her inability to perform under pressure, or she would succeed, and he would lose nothing more than the right to harass one insignificant private. The targets Maya was proposing to engage were at the extreme range of standard infantry rifles, and hitting them consistently would require exceptional skill even under ideal conditions. "What makes you think you can even see those targets without a scope?" Turner asked, trying to regain some initiative in the conversation. Maya reached into her equipment bag and pulled out a pair of standard military binoculars. "Iron sights. And these," she said simply. "Just like our grandfathers did in World War II, just like infantry soldiers have been doing for over a century. No fancy optics, no computerized ballistic calculators, no crutches. Just marksmanship fundamentals. And the kind of skills that apparently aren't being taught anymore." The challenge was both practical and philosophical. Maya was proposing to demonstrate not just her shooting ability, but a connection to the foundational skills that had made American soldiers effective for generations. In an era of increasingly sophisticated technology, she was offering to prove that human skill and determination still mattered. Turner looked around at his companions, seeing doubt in their faces where there had been confidence moments before. He was trapped by his own aggression, backed into a corner by Maya's unexpected response to his bullying. To refuse the challenge would be to admit weakness in front of his followers. To accept it was to risk public humiliation. "Fine," he said finally, his voice tight with suppressed anger. "But I get to choose the rifle, and I get to inspect it first. No tricks, no special modifications, no match-grade ammunition. Just standard military equipment." Maya nodded, her expression serious. "Agreed. One condition, though. We do this right now, before the range gets busy. I want to get back to my original training schedule." As the group made their way toward the armory, Danny Kim fell into step beside Maya. His voice was barely audible when he spoke. "Staff Sergeant, you don't have to do this for me. I can handle Turner and his friends." Maya looked at the young soldier, seeing herself at that age, uncertain, trying to prove herself, carrying the weight of other people's expectations. "Danny," she said quietly, "this isn't about you anymore. This is about what kind of unit we want to be, what kind of soldiers we want to be. Sometimes you have to draw a line and defend it, even when the odds aren't in your favor." But as they approached the armory, Maya felt a familiar knot forming in her stomach. She had just committed herself to an incredibly difficult shooting demonstration under the worst possible conditions, with a weapon she wouldn't get to choose or test beforehand. Turner would undoubtedly select the most problematic rifle he could find, and Maya would have to make it work flawlessly on the first try. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on her. In trying to protect Danny Kim from bullying, she had created the exact kind of high-pressure, high-stakes situation that she had been trying to avoid. The only difference was that now, instead of facing evaluation from superior officers, she was facing the judgment of her peers and the possibility of public failure. As Turner selected a rifle from the armory, predictably choosing one of the older, more worn weapons, Maya realized that the next few minutes would define not just her reputation, but her understanding of who she was as a soldier and as a person. The weight of that realization settled on her shoulders like the mountain heat, heavy and inescapable. Turner emerged from the armory with a satisfied smirk and rifle number 7743, the same weapon Maya had spent 14 hours repairing just 2 days earlier. The irony was so perfect that Maya almost laughed out loud. Of all the rifles Turner could have chosen to sabotage her demonstration, he had unknowingly selected the one weapon in the entire armory that she knew more intimately than any other. Every spring, every pin, every tolerance had been personally inspected and corrected by her own hands. But Turner didn't know that. As far as he was concerned, he had chosen a rifle with a history of mechanical problems, one that had been written up multiple times for feeding issues and cycling failures. His research had been thorough. Maya had to give him credit for that. He had specifically sought out a weapon that would be most likely to malfunction at a critical moment. "This is the rifle," Turner announced, holding up the M4 with theatrical authority. "Serial number 7743. According to the maintenance logs, it's been having some reliability issues lately. Should be perfect for your little demonstration." His smile was predatory, confident in his tactical superiority. Maya accepted the rifle without comment, her hands immediately recognizing the familiar weight and balance. She conducted a brief inspection, checking the bore for obstructions, testing the bolt's movement, ensuring the safety functioned properly, while Turner and his companions watched with barely concealed anticipation. To them, her methodical approach looked like stalling, like a shooter trying to find excuses for the failure that was surely coming. "Satisfied?" Turner asked after Maya had spent nearly 5 minutes examining the weapon. "Or do you need to call this whole thing off? No shame in admitting you bit off more than you can chew." Maya looked up from the rifle, her dark eyes reflecting something that made Turner's confident expression falter slightly. "Actually," she said, her voice carrying an odd note of satisfaction, "this rifle will do just fine. In fact, I couldn't have asked for a better weapon." The small group made their way to the firing line, where Maya began her final preparations. She had no spotting scope, no ballistic calculator, no range cards with environmental data. Instead, she relied on the skills that had been drilled into her during countless training exercises. Reading wind direction from the movement of dust and vegetation, estimating range using the Mill relation formula, calculating bullet drop using the fundamental principles of external ballistics. The targets on the ridge were arranged in a line from left to right, each one representing a different range and challenge. The first target, at approximately 400 meters, was a standard military silhouette made of steel. The second, at 500 meters, was smaller, about half the size of the first. The third target, at 600 meters, was positioned on a slight reverse slope, making it partially obscured. The fourth and fifth targets, at 700 and 800 meters respectively, were little more than steel plates the size of dinner plates, visible only as tiny glints of metal against the brown mountainside. Maya knelt behind the rifle, adjusting the iron sights for the expected range and wind conditions. The morning air was relatively still, but she could see heat mirage beginning to rise from the valley floor as the sun climbed higher. Wind direction was variable, shifting between 5 and 10 miles per hour from different directions depending on the local terrain features. It was exactly the kind of shooting conditions that separated competent marksmen from exceptional ones. "You've got 3 minutes starting now," Turner announced, clicking the start button on his stopwatch with obvious relish. Maya's world suddenly condensed to a sphere of absolute focus about 3 feet in diameter. Everything outside that sphere, Turner's smirk, the watching soldiers, the pressure of performance, simply ceased to exist. This was a skill she had developed over years of combat deployments, the ability to create a bubble of calm concentration even in the middle of chaos. Her breathing slowed to the rhythm that had been trained into her through thousands of repetitions. Inhale, natural respiratory pause, sight alignment, trigger press, follow through. The fundamentals of marksmanship were as automatic as walking, embedded so deeply in her muscle memory that conscious thought was unnecessary. The first shot broke. With a crisp surprise, the rifle recoiling solidly into her shoulder. Through her binoculars, Maya could see the 400-meter target swing on its mounting post. A solid hit. She worked the bolt smoothly, ejecting the spent cartridge and chambering a fresh round. The rifle's action was flawless, cycling with the mechanical precision that she had spent so many hours ensuring. The second target required a slight adjustment for both range and wind. Maya made the correction instinctively, trusting years of training and experience. The shot felt good leaving the barrel, and her binoculars confirmed another hit at 500 meters. 2 down, 3 to go, with just over 2 minutes remaining. But it was at this moment that Maya noticed something that made her blood run cold. A small group of soldiers had gathered to watch the demonstration, drawn by word-of-mouth reports of the impromptu shooting match. Among them, standing about 50 meters behind the firing line, was Lieutenant Colonel Harrison himself. The commanding officer was watching through his own binoculars, his expression unreadable but his presence unmistakable. Maya realized with crystalline clarity that this was no longer just about protecting Danny Kim or proving a point to Turner. Her performance here, under these conditions, with the base commander as a witness, would directly impact the evaluation scheduled for Monday morning. If she failed spectacularly in front of Harrison, there would be no recovery, no second chance, no opportunity to redeem herself when it mattered most. The knowledge hit her like a physical blow. Her heart rate, which had been steady and controlled, suddenly spiked. Her breathing became shallow and rapid. The calm bubble of concentration that had surrounded her began to crack and fracture. Maya found herself thinking about all the things that could go wrong. A gust of wind at the wrong moment, a mechanical failure, a simple miscalculation that would send a bullet wide of its mark. Turner noticed the change in her demeanor immediately. "Problem, Rodriguez?" he called out, his voice carrying false concern. "Maybe this is harder than you thought it would be. Pressure getting to you?" Maya forced herself to take a deep breath and look at the third target through her binoculars. At 600 meters, partially obscured by the terrain, it required not just accuracy but a precise understanding of holdover and wind compensation. She had less than 90 seconds remaining to engage 3 targets at ranges that would challenge even experienced snipers. But as she settled back behind the rifle, something unexpected happened. Instead of fighting the pressure, instead of trying to ignore the growing audience or pretend that the stakes weren't real, Maya embraced it all. She accepted the fear, acknowledged the pressure, and then made a conscious decision to trust in the skills that had been forged through years of training and tested in the crucible of combat. The third shot was the most difficult yet, requiring her to aim at a point several feet above and to the left of the actual target to compensate for bullet drop and wind drift. Maya held her breath, aligned the sights with mechanical precision, and pressed the trigger with the same smooth, consistent pressure she had used thousands of times before. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, and through the binoculars, she saw the target rock backward from the impact. 3 hits, 2 targets remaining, 45 seconds left. Maya's movements became fluid and economical as she transitioned to the 4th target at 700 meters. There was no time for extended deliberation, no opportunity to second-guess her calculations. She adjusted her point of aim, controlled her breathing, and fired. The tiny steel plate disappeared from view as the bullet struck it squarely, spinning it off its mount and sending it tumbling down the mountainside. 1 target left, 20 seconds remaining. The final target at 800 meters was barely visible even through binoculars, just a small rectangular piece of steel that represented the absolute limit of what could be reasonably expected from an infantry rifle with iron sights. Maya knew that this shot would require not just skill, but a degree of luck that couldn't be trained or practiced. Wind conditions at that range were unpredictable, bullet drop was extreme, and the margin for error was essentially 0. Maya chambered her final round and settled into position. She could hear Turner counting down the seconds, his voice betraying excitement at what he clearly expected to be her inevitable failure. 10, 9, 8. Maya found her natural respiratory pause and aligned the sights. The target was so distant that she had to aim nearly 3 feet high and 2 feet to the left, trusting in calculations that existed more in intuition than in conscious thought. 3, 2, 1. The shot broke just as Turner reached 0. Maya held her position for the follow-through, then slowly lowered the rifle and picked up her binoculars. For a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, she couldn't locate the target through the optical magnification. Heat mirage distorted the view, and the distance made everything shimmer and dance. Then she found it, and her heart nearly stopped. The steel target was intact, unmoved, apparently untouched. Maya felt the crushing weight of failure settling over her like a physical presence. After everything, the challenge, the pressure, the perfect performance on the first 4 targets, she had missed the most important shot when it mattered most. Turner's triumphant laughter filled the silence. 5 for 5, you said. Every target, you said. Looks like the pressure got to you after all, Rodriguez. Guess you're not as tough as you... Check again. The voice belonged to Lieutenant Colonel Harrison, who had approached the firing line while Maya was focused on the distant target. He was looking through a high-powered spotting scope, his expression serious and concentrated. Sir? Turner's laughter died abruptly. The target, Harrison said, his voice carrying absolute authority. Check the target again. Look more carefully. Maya raised her binoculars once more, scanning the area around where the 800-meter target should be. At first, she saw nothing unusual, just the steel mounting post standing alone against the brown mountainside. But then, as her eyes adjusted and the heat mirage shifted, she saw something that made her gasp. The target wasn't missing. It hadn't been knocked off its mount by the impact. Instead, it had been hit so precisely, so perfectly centered, that Maya's bullet had punched a hole clean through the middle of the steel plate without displacing it even slightly. The target remained in position, but now had a perfectly round hole where the center of mass should be. Harrison lowered his spotting scope and turned to face the small crowd that had gathered. His voice carried clearly across the firing line. 5 shots, 5 hits, in under 3 minutes, with iron sights, at ranges from 400 to 800 meters, with a rifle that was supposedly having mechanical problems. He paused, letting the implications sink in. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe we just witnessed a new base record for precision rifle demonstration. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of wind moving through the mountain passes. Turner stood frozen, his mouth slightly open, the stopwatch still clutched in his hand. Danny Kim was staring at Maya with something approaching awe. The other soldiers who had gathered to watch were murmuring among themselves, trying to process what they had just witnessed. But Maya barely heard any of it. She was looking at the rifle in her hands, the same weapon that had been jammed and unusable just days earlier, the same rifle that Turner had chosen specifically to ensure her failure. The irony was perfect, beautiful, and completely invisible to everyone except her. In trying to sabotage her demonstration, Turner had unknowingly given her the one weapon that would guarantee her success. Maya carefully cleared the rifle and handed it back to Turner, who accepted it automatically, still too stunned to speak. "I believe," Maya said quietly, "that concludes our agreement. Private Kim won't be having any more problems with harassment, and I'll be staying right here with my unit." As she gathered her equipment and prepared to leave, Maya felt a hand on her shoulder. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison was standing beside her, his expression mixing respect with something that might have been amazement. "Rodriguez," he said, "I think Monday's evaluation just became a formality. The real question now is what we do with a soldier who can perform miracles on demand." 3 months later, Maya found herself in a place she never could have imagined. Standing before a joint military review board in Washington, D.C., wearing dress blues adorned with ribbons she was still getting used to seeing on her own chest. The Exceptional Performance Medal felt foreign against her uniform, a tangible reminder of how dramatically her life had changed since that morning when she'd faced down Turner's challenge with a rifle that had become legendary in its own right. The events following her record-breaking demonstration had unfolded with the inexorable momentum of an avalanche. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison hadn't just canceled the Monday evaluation. He had forwarded a complete report of Maya's performance to Division Headquarters, along with video footage that had been captured by the base's security cameras. The footage, grainy but unmistakably clear, showed Maya's 5 shots in sequence, culminating in the impossible precision of that final 800-meter target. Within a week, Maya had been contacted by representatives from the Army Marksmanship Unit, an elite organization she had only heard about in whispered conversations among career soldiers. Within 2 weeks, she was temporarily assigned to Fort Benning for evaluation by some of the finest shooters in the military. Within a month, she had received orders that would change everything: assignment to a classified program developing advanced marksmanship training protocols for Special Operations Forces. But it wasn't just her shooting skills that had caught the attention of higher command. The full story of her confrontation with Turner had eventually emerged through official channels, revealing layers of complexity that even Maya hadn't fully understood at the time. Turner, it turned out, had been under investigation for multiple incidents of harassment and misconduct, behavior that had been carefully documented but never effectively addressed through normal disciplinary channels. Maya's public humiliation of him had provided the catalyst for his removal from the unit and, ultimately, his discharge from the service. More importantly, her actions had inspired a culture change throughout Forward Operating Base Sentinel. Danny Kim, emboldened by Maya's protection and example, had reported additional instances of harassment that led to a comprehensive review of unit climate and leadership practices. Other junior soldiers, seeing that someone was finally willing to stand up to toxic behaviors, had come forward with their own experiences. The ripple effects extended far beyond a single confrontation behind a communications bunker. Now, sitting in the Pentagon briefing room that felt more like a boardroom than a military facility, Maya listened as Colonel Sandra Reeves outlined the opportunity that had brought her here. Reeves was a career officer with a reputation for identifying and developing exceptional talent, and her presence at this meeting indicated the level of interest Maya's case had generated. "Staff Sergeant Rodriguez," Reeves began, consulting a thick folder of documents. "Your performance at FOB Sentinel represents something we don't see very often: the convergence of exceptional technical skill, leadership potential, and moral courage. The question before us today is how the Army can best utilize those capabilities." Maya had learned enough about military bureaucracy to recognize that this was more than a career counseling session. The presence of representatives from multiple commands, including officers she didn't recognize wearing insignia she couldn't identify, suggested that decisions had already been made, and this meeting was more about implementation than exploration. "The Advanced Marksmanship Training Initiative," Reeves continued, "is designed to revolutionize how we prepare soldiers for precision shooting in combat environments. We're not talking about traditional sniper training. We're developing methodologies that can transform ordinary infantrymen into exceptional marksmen in a fraction of the time currently required." Maya found herself thinking about the hours she had spent in the armory, methodically troubleshooting that jammed rifle, understanding every component and system through patient observation and analysis. "Ma'am," she said carefully, "with respect, exceptional marksmanship isn't just about technique. It's about understanding the equipment, developing judgment under pressure, and most importantly, having the moral framework to use deadly skills responsibly." Reeves smiled, the first genuine expression Maya had seen from her. "Exactly. Which is why this program isn't just about creating better shooters. It's about developing soldier leaders who can embody the values and capabilities that define professional excellence." The conversation that followed revealed the scope of what was being offered. Maya would be assigned to a joint training facility where she would work with expert instructors from multiple services, developing curricula that combined technical marksmanship training with leadership development and ethical instruction. She would have access to resources and equipment that most soldiers never saw, working with some of the most sophisticated weapon systems in the military inventory. But the most intriguing aspect of the assignment was its philosophical foundation. The program was based on the understanding that truly exceptional soldiers weren't created through advanced technology or revolutionary techniques. They were developed through the careful cultivation of fundamental skills, moral courage, and the kind of quiet professionalism that Maya had demonstrated throughout her career. "There's one more thing," Reeves said as the formal briefing concluded. "We'd like you to consider accepting a direct commission to second lieutenant. Your combination of technical expertise and demonstrated leadership makes you an ideal candidate for the officer corps." Maya felt the weight of the offer settling around her like a physical presence. Throughout her military career, she had defined herself as an enlisted soldier, someone who worked with her hands, solved practical problems, and led through example rather than authority. The idea of becoming an officer represented a fundamental shift in identity that she wasn't sure she was prepared to make. "Colonel," Maya said slowly, "I appreciate the confidence you're showing in me, but I need to understand something. This program, these opportunities, are they being offered because of what I can shoot, or because of who I am as a soldier?" Reeves leaned back in her chair, studying Maya with the kind of intense evaluation that career officers learn to recognize. "That's exactly the right question," she said finally, "and the fact that you're asking it is precisely why we want you in this program." The meeting concluded with Maya being given 48 hours to consider the offer. As she walked through the corridors of the Pentagon, past walls lined with portraits of military leaders who had shaped American history, she found herself thinking about the journey that had brought her to this moment. From a jammed rifle in an armory to a boardroom discussion of her future, the path seemed impossible to believe, yet here she was. That evening, in her temporary quarters at Fort Myer, Maya called Danny Kim, who was now serving as a communications specialist with a different unit. His voice carried across the secure connection with the confidence that had grown steadily since their encounter with Turner. "Staff Sergeant," he said, and Maya could hear the smile in his voice. I heard through the grapevine that you're being offered some kind of special assignment. Can't say I'm surprised. What you did that day changed everything for a lot of us." "Danny," Maya said, "I want you to understand something. What happened that morning wasn't about my shooting skills or some dramatic gesture. It was about refusing to accept that bullying and harassment are just part of military culture. That's a choice every soldier has to make, every day." There was a long pause before Danny responded. "I know that now," he said quietly. "But someone had to show us that the choice existed. Someone had to demonstrate that standing up to toxic leadership was possible, even when the odds looked impossible." After the call ended, Maya sat in the darkness of her quarters, thinking about the decision she needed to make. The offer from Colonel Reeves represented everything she had never known she wanted: recognition, opportunity, the chance to influence military training and culture at the highest levels. But it also meant leaving behind the identity she had, carefully constructed over years of service, stepping into a role that would require her to embrace the spotlight rather than avoid it. She thought about rifle number 7743, still serving at FOB Sentinel, now functioning flawlessly thanks to the patient work she had done in that late-night session in the armory. The rifle hadn't changed fundamentally. It was still the same weapon, built from the same materials, designed for the same purpose. But the careful attention to its mechanical systems, the methodical diagnosis and repair of its problems, had transformed it from unreliable equipment into a precision instrument. Maya realized that her own transformation had followed a similar pattern. She was still the same person who had enlisted years ago, driven by the same values and commitment to service. But the challenges she had faced, the problems she had solved, the moral choices she had made had refined and strengthened her capabilities in ways she was only beginning to understand. The next morning, Maya returned to Colonel Reeves' office with her decision. She would accept the assignment to the Advanced Marksmanship Training Initiative, but she would decline the commission to officer rank. Her reasoning was simple. The most important lessons she had learned about leadership, about moral courage, about excellence under pressure, had come from her experience as an enlisted soldier working alongside other enlisted soldiers. "I can be more effective," Maya explained, "working within the system I understand, with the people I've learned to serve alongside. The program you're describing needs someone who can bridge the gap between theoretical training and practical application. That means someone who has actually been in the trenches, literally and figuratively." Colonel Reeves nodded slowly, understanding implicit in her expression. "Very well, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez. But I suspect this won't be the last time you're offered a commission. Excellence has a way of creating its own opportunities." As Maya prepared to leave Washington and report to her new assignment, she received one final piece of news that brought everything full circle. Turner, whose discharge from the Army had been finalized the previous week, had been arrested for assault charges related to incidents in his civilian life. The pattern of behavior that had been enabled and ignored in the military had continued in the civilian world, with predictable and tragic results. The news served as a sobering reminder of the stakes involved in Maya's new role. The program she would be joining wasn't just about creating better marksmen. It was about developing soldiers who understood the moral weight of their capabilities, who could be trusted with the authority that came with deadly skills, who would stand up for the right values even when doing so was difficult or dangerous. Maya's last act before leaving Washington was to visit the National Museum of the United States Army, where she spent an hour in the section dedicated to the evolution of military marksmanship. The displays traced the development of shooting, skills from the Revolutionary War through modern conflicts, showing how technical improvements had been matched by changes in training philosophy and ethical instruction. Standing before a display case containing rifles from different eras of American military history, Maya reflected on the continuity that connected her to generations of soldiers who had faced similar challenges and choices. The weapons had evolved, the technology had advanced, but the fundamental requirements of military service remained constant: technical competence, moral courage, and the willingness to serve something larger than oneself. 3 years later, Staff Sergeant Maya Rodriguez would be promoted to Sergeant First Class and recognized as the Army's leading expert on accelerated marksmanship training. Her methodologies would be adopted throughout the military. Her teachings would influence the development of an entire generation of soldier marksmen, and her example would inspire countless others to embrace the kind of quiet professionalism that defined true military excellence. But all of that lay in the future. For now, as Maya prepared to begin the next chapter of her career, she carried with her the lessons learned from a jammed rifle and the understanding that sometimes the most important battles are fought not on distant battlefields but in the spaces between what is and what should be, where individual choices determine the character of institutions and the meaning of service. The story that had begun with 14 hours of patient work in an armory continued through a moment of moral courage behind a communications bunker and culminated in an impossible shot through the center of a steel target at 800 meters, was really a story about transformation, not just of a malfunctioning rifle into a precision instrument, but of a quiet professional into a leader whose influence would extend far beyond anything she could have imagined when she first picked up the jammed weapon and decided to make it work.